listening to Inspire Change, a broadcast that strives to educate, motivate, and empower men to challenge traditions of masculinity. To guide us through the intricacies and intersections of emotions, relationships, and male identity is renowned psychologist, author, and speaker Gunter. This is Inspire Change.
Before I begin the actual podcast, I would like to respectfully acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, who are the traditional custodians of the land on which I work. I would also like to pay my respects to their elders past and present. Welcome everybody to another episode of Inspire Change with Gunter. I'm your host. Now, in this particular episode, I'm actually going to take a little deviation from the norm, if there is such a thing. Because over the last few weeks, one of the sorts of things that I've been thinking a lot about is the whole issue about misinformation. And the fact that for some reason or another, we've gotten into a time and era that sort of reminds me a little bit about the Dark Ages, those days where there were witch hunts and, people were invested in magical thinking and things were not really necessarily based on fact or any sort of scientific process, but rather through the whimsy of the particular person portraying what they thought was fact or what they knew wasn't fact, but they fed it to the people anyway. And to me, this is of a deep concern, and especially as a therapist where I spend a lot of time with people looking at helping them to help themselves through being able to think rationally, logically, and objectively. Now, there are obviously some barriers to that. A lot of that's emotional, some of it's subconscious. We have unconscious biases, we have cognitive dissonance arising, all sorts of stuff. But in this particular podcast, one of the things that I thought I would focus on was the whole idea that there is in fact a hierarchy about information, and it's called the DIKW pyramid. Oh yeah, here we go, another thingy. But let me explain. In essence, there is a distinct hierarchy that goes from data to wisdom, and it influences our modern world in a huge way. Now, the problem is that it'd be all good if we could go from data to wisdom in a nice single bound, okay? But that's not what happens. So the idea is that we need to look at what happens between data and wisdom, and we need to understand how that works. So fundamentally, let me explain. The relationship between data includes information, knowledge, and then wisdom. And it's often conceptualized as either a hierarchy or a continuum. And each level adds context, understanding, and relevance to the one below it. So let's break this down. Let's look at each layer and how they relate to one another. Okay, so the first bit is data. So what are we talking about? Well, essentially data is raw, unorganized facts and figures without any context. I often refer to data as like the binary in coding, okay, zeros and ones. Now, these can be other numbers, symbols, or even raw sensory outputs. And at this particular stage, there is essentially no meaning or interpretation. So another example is consider temperature sensor reading 25, 26, and 27 degrees Celsius at different times. And that's it. That's all we got. So the next level is that of information. Now, we've often heard the term, we live in the information age, right, or the data age. Well, neither of them is exactly true. So what are we talking about when we talk about information? So when data is processed, then organised, or presented in a given context to make it useful, it becomes information. Information answers basic questions like who, what, where, and when. So, for example, getting back to the temperature thingy, the temperature readings, which is data, can be turned into information by saying the room's temperature ranged from 25 to 27 degrees Celsius on August 15, 2023. Okay, get it? Really, really important. Context is important. You can't make a statement presenting data without really expanding it. Or you can, but how much meaning does it carry? What does it really tell you? So the question is, okay, well, what's next? And in this context, we're now going on to knowledge. So knowledge is fundamentally the understanding and the interpretation of information. It involves making sense of a situation, its elements, and the interrelationships. Knowledge answers the how and sometimes the why. So, let me extrapolate again with that thing about temperature. Knowing that the room's temperature rises during the day and understanding that 25 to 70 and 25 to 27 degrees Celsius is a comfortable range for most people implies a certain level of knowledge about thermal comfort and daily temperature fluctuations. Now, as some people might say, well, I'm really comfortable at 30 as well. Okay, goody for you. But this is what we're talking about. We're talking about that this is knowledge. This is important in a sense. Okay, now here comes the beauty. Well, you might say, well, where does wisdom fit into this? What about wisdom? Well, wisdom involves the application of knowledge and experience to make informed, prudent choices. It encompasses ethical considerations, long-term thinking, and the capacity for balanced judgment. Wisdom answers questions like why and what's best. So, for example, getting back to the temperature example, deciding to set the air conditioner to keep the room at 26 degrees for optimal comfort and energy efficiency demonstrates wisdom. It's smart. This decision might also consider long-term sustainability and the well-being of all people in that room. Okay, so this is a really, really important hierarchy in understanding all the stuff that we're exposed to, especially these days through social media. Now, the reason why I'm sharing this with you is because I want you to think about this as your baseline for understanding stuff. Okay? So if we put the above example into place, right, into an illustration, let's imagine that you're growing a plant. Okay, the data is that you measure sunlight, humidity, and soil pH levels. Information, you learn that your plant needs moderate sunlight, high humidity, and slightly acidic soil to grow well. Knowledge, you understand that you need to place the plant near a window, but out of direct sunlight. Mist it regularly and use a specific type of soil. Now, here comes the wisdom bit. Knowing that you'll be out of town, you automate a misting system to maintain humidity and position the plant so that it gets enough indirect sunlight, ensuring not just growth but long-term flourishing. Okay, now this is, and apply that to more complex issues in our society, like being exclusive versus being inclusive. And we need to be able to use this framework to begin to ask critical questions whenever we're presented with stuff. Because we know that the media floods us with all sorts of stuff, especially the media of Murdoch, which is a great basis for misinformation and lies and deception. I'll make no bones about taking that position. The United States has been an exemplary illustration of that whole process. So has Brexit. And so is Australia going through similar issues with some of the sort of important social issues here. We have fundamentally ideas that are presented to us that we really need to think about critically. So one of the other aspects in this whole picture is that there is a significant shift that aims to replace wisdom, and that's AI and algorithms. We need to begin to think critically about how AI and algorithms are affecting decision making. So, for example, let's look at self-driving cars. Now, these cars are going to be making decisions based on algorithms and data, but they lack the ethical nuances a human driver might employ, which is a bit like the trolley problem in philosophy. Now, if you don't know that problem, please let me encourage you to look it up. It's a beauty. You might come away with a bit of a headache, but worthwhile exploring. The other aspect here is the pace of modern life. So we have been persistently, over a long period of time, being influenced to think about quick fixes versus long-term wisdom. How fast-paced is our life these days? But in that fast pace, how wise are some of the decisions that we're making? So let me give you an example, a very simple example. So fast food. Okay, let's use that as a metaphor. People often choose the quicker option, even if it's not the healthiest, showing a potential lapse in applying wisdom for long-term health. We know fundamentally that many, many people will persistently make that choice. And it's not just because it's quick and easy, but that fast food is also financially cheaper. So we get drawn into this false reasoning. What about social media, the bane of our current existence, folks? Right? Clicks over wisdom? Now, how do social media platforms incentivize immediacy and virility? So, good example of this is the cancel culture. With social media, judgments are quick but often lack nuanced understanding, which wisdom fundamentally would provide if we were to apply it. But no, we've been drawn into, down the rabbit hole, and we've met the Mad Hatter. Because this shit is crazy. The fact that we make personal, social, political, economic decisions based on clickbait is just nuts. Now, the next level that we need to address here is the cultural and educational impacts all of this has. Wisdom in today's culture needs to encompass the educational system. We need a level of wisdom in this. So where we look at, for example, traditional societies where elders are respected for their wisdom, where in Western culture currently youth and innovation are often prioritized without considering whether it is smart to do. Think about Oppenheimer. Right? The fact that we could make the atomic bomb, right, was it in fact the right thing to do? Now, many people would argue no. Some people would argue, well, it stopped World War II. Well, did it? There's some serious questions about that. And if you're a history buff, check it out. Okay? What about in the current global situation? What about our global challenges? Where do we need wisdom here? My argument is right here and now, historically, we need this more than ever because we are at the brink of descending into the dark age where religious imperatives override scientific fact, where superstitious thinking is the benchmark rather than clearly articulated wise decisions. The classic one in this context is obviously climate change. And in that context, we require not just technological innovation, knowledge, but also ethical considerations, i.e., wisdom for long-term sustainability. And what concerns me is that we knew this 55, 60 years ago, and we have perpetually been thwarted by the money holders. And I talk about that not so much as the elites, but there is obviously the 1 to 5% who've got a vested interest in maintaining the status quo, i.e., thwart any attempts to make wise decisions about climate, about sustainability. Now, interestingly enough, this is beginning to operate at another level, which is about the rights of minorities and especially the issues of equality of minorities, including women, who are in fact not a minority, folks. I'm talking about 51% of the population, give or take a few. Where again, we're going back into, mythological thinking. Patriarchy is an ideology of mythical proportions. It has actually no basis in anything to do with science, in anything to do with reasonable living. Enslaving 50% of the population in some form or other is unconscionable. So my argument is we need wisdom more than ever. It is absolutely a critical imperative. And we need to apply it to many, many different areas, especially areas that have somehow managed to fall through the gaps in the floor ethically. Economics. Neoliberalism is an immoral and unethical social engineering project that has failed. Look at the status of the UK and look at the United States of America, who is potentially facing civil war as a result of this machination, this idea of individualism and the lie of meritocracy that is in fact the legacy process. If this keeps going, if we do not challenge patriarchy, neoliberalism, and the other ideologies that are fundamentally based on superstitions, whether they be of a social nature or a religious nature, we are not going to make it as a species. Now, the chances are the planet's going to recover. In fact, we know that very well when we look at what happened during COVID, and dolphins reappeared in the Venice canals, and populations of birds returned to singing. It is no longer a possible option. Wisdom needs to return to a collective consciousness. And we've really fundamentally abandoned it. So in my view, we need to go from data to wisdom in order to inhibit the decline of wisdom in our culture. So food for thought, please think about this carefully. Think about the podcast deeply. and take it away with you. Inspire the right sort of change. We need to be a society moving towards wisdom and encouraging a humanitarian approach to coexistence. So until next time, this is me signing off. Love to hear from you. And if you're interested, please check out my work on www.guntersvoboda.com or www.goodmengreat.com.
Thank you for listening to Inspire Change, a broadcast that strives to educate, motivate, and empower men to challenge traditions of masculinity. For more information on the Making Good Men Great movement, or for individual or group coaching sessions with Gunter, visit goodmengreat.com. For inquiries regarding broadcast topics or appearing on the show, email Miranda@noirtainment.com. That's Miranda at NOIRTAINMENT.com.